Pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Denis Vinette. I'm the Vice President of the Travelers Operations here at the Canada Border Services Agency. Certainly wish I could be there with you in person today. Didn't quite work out for my schedule for this year, but nonetheless happy to be able to share some views and some thoughts in regards to where the CBSA is at this point in time as we head into the middle of the summer season, and hopefully maybe impart a few things that will resonate with you and solicit some feedback that we can make use of here at the CBSA. So thank you for inviting me to be with you today. Thank you to Anthony for taking the time to reach out and invite me. Certainly would have loved to have been there in person. So where are we? Many of you will recall that in October of last year, we put an end to the COVID border measures that had been in place for some period of time. And so it was a return to where we were at back in January of 2020, when health measures at the border, specifically for COVID, were not in place. And since that time, much has evolved and much has, changed around us, both globally and here domestically in Canada. So since that time, a couple of things that have occupied the CBSA has certainly been supporting the government's commitment to resettling Ukrainians who are seeking safe shelter while their country is under attack from Russia. And with that, the Russian sanctions in terms of who can come to Canada, as well as trade sanctions that are currently in effect. We've also been supporting the resettlement of Afghanis to Canada throughout the country on a day-to-day basis, mostly arriving through charter arrivals from Pakistan. And we've been responding in a way that Canadians truly do all the time in providing that humanitarian assistance and resettling folks in Canada as they seek a better life away from the oppression that occurred through the transition back in Afghanistan. A couple of things on the asylum and immigration front. We have a very ambitious Canadian immigration policy stance, and we've been dealing with an ever-increasing number of students coming to study in Canada, foreign workers, as well as welcoming Canadians or future Canadians to Canada through our permanent residency streams. And so big focus has been, how do we make sure that we do that in a seamless way? It's a heavy workload, but make sure it doesn't impact the balance of what the CBSA needs to deliver in terms of both its travelers and commercial services, and make sure that we ensure that compliance and enforcement still continues to occur. One of the big changes this past spring has been the Safe Third Country Agreement being upheld by the Supreme Court, but also an addendum to that with the US, which, if you will, put an end to what we had seen, what we called Roxham Road, which was people circumventing entry to Canada from a port of entry perspective in order to access Canada's immigration and asylum system. And so that has really kind of put an end to that, and the numbers have dropped significantly. And so the CBSA has been delivering, supporting on the government's mandate, on its humanitarian stance, on reopening the border, but also making sure that we're addressing the compliance and enforcement requirements. So where do we find ourselves today? Well, we just came through a winter season where charter returns to sun destinations really took off. We had a lot of travel with the larger carriers and the tour operators, but also with the business aviation sector and the private corporate travels, if you will, throughout the world. And we've been focusing on a review of what services we offer where, and what have been our service hours. We do know that for your particular association and your members, quite a few of you will arrive perhaps off hours or at second or third airports. And therefore, how do we get to a point where we can actually ensure that we've got officers available, a service can be rendered? And so we've been looking, and we're conducting a review currently of the services offered at all of our ports of entry. And for those that are land-based, we are working with our US CBP counterparts to do a comparison of what hours are offered, is there a rationalization required, and therefore what will be kind of the service offerings of the future. And I think that is important. I'll come back to it because the border of the future will look very different than the border of today. And this is one of the pieces and one of the cornerstones that allow us to start to plan for the types of services we offer in the future. Maybe mention two other things that are occupying us right now. The first one is our land border and our air transportation sectors both flourish in the summer. And so European destinations through air, US through land, and we are now back to well over 90% in the air sector in terms of comparing to 2019 volumes. And we're in the 85 to 90% range at the land borders. And so not quite where we were, but we expect that by the end of summer, we likely will find ourselves back to where we were in the past. And in order to address those volumes, we developed what we call our summer action plan. And so we've promoted it. We make sure to have our officers scheduled. We look at our peak periods. We plan for it. We put a multitude of strategies. We restrict officer leave in some instances just to make sure that we have sufficient staff at the right time. We go over, if you will, all of the requirements at the border through our communications exercises to make sure people are informed, particularly before the long weekend. We had an Instagram short reel for the Calgary Stampede to let people know how to prepare for their arrival in Canada. And so the summer season has really preoccupied us quite a bit. Our planning had actually started last fall. And that takes me to Nexus. And so we've come through to develop a new model, a new approach. It will continue to evolve, but having reopened all of our enrollment centers, both the US based and the Canadian based, in two different approaches in terms of how you get registered and approved in order to obtain your card, has been absolutely critical. And we've been able to reduce the inventory of applications that we had. And there is an availability of, if you will, interviews right now for those who do wish to go forward and actually take the time to schedule their interviews both in Canada and in the US. And so it's not months out, it's actually far sooner. And so if you have members or if yourselves are needing to renew your membership, there's an opportunity for you to do so. The future, where are we headed? Well, we are heavily focused on what will be the modern digital opportunities that will present themselves for the future. How can we render our services at distance using technology? We can order phones for, order coffees for pickup at Starbucks through your app with a prepaid pre-order. You just have to show up to the counter. How can we replicate that in the cross-border travel world? We are very fortunate that the government has given us the mandate to do this through what we call our Traveler Modernization Initiative. We've received policy cover through a Treasury Board submission and a memorandum to Cabinet. It was announced in the federal budget. We actually have over $300 million to invest in this space. And the Arrive Can and Advanced Declaration is the beginning of that journey where we will start to offer modern digital services. We're very excited about it, but we are understanding that, we are needing to secure, if you will, the social license is what we refer to it. In other words, acceptance. People will use identity and bioidentity in a myriad of ways in order to, access services, applications, and other things. But when it comes to government making use of that, it's a different conversation, and there's a different level of interest in regards to privacy and protection and legal considerations around that. So know that we've made engagement as we advance our traveler modernization a very big piece of what we wish to undertake. We want to hear from those who will be using it, those from certain communities, those who perhaps may have challenges in using technology. And so it will be an offering. It will not replace all of our services. We will have the traditional model, if you will, but certainly modernizing in a way that serves, the masses across all the modes of transportation will be and something that will serve us extremely well and will allow us to modernize. One other that might be of interest to this group is the fact that we're looking to modernize our telephone reporting center approach. And again, introducing a digital tool. So whether it be advanced declaration, digital reporting on arrival, how can we manage the provision of information and the ability for us to do our risk assessment and therefore determine whether or not we wish to attend the arrival of an aircraft at a particular location. And so one of the big pieces is that the Customs Act prescribed that individuals had to present themselves in person to an officer in order to be able to be cleared into Canada. And that could be done face-to-face physically, or it could be done in speaking to an officer over the phone. Recently, through the Budget Implementation Act, we received a legislative change that will allow us to create the regulations now to allow individuals to report in, be cleared in a digital fashion. Therefore, no need to call, no need to talk to an officer. You'll be able to communicate with us digitally, and therefore we'll be able to do our risk assessment and make a determination as to whether or not you will be free to move on arrival or not. And that will change how we do today's telephone reporting center reporting approach by adding a digital element. I think that will be welcome even by the small general aviation community as well as the business aviation community. In terms of your particular association, your members, Anthony, I would say that going forward, continue to invite you to notify us early, locally where required, or through the telephone reporting center when you do plan on returning to Canada, providing all of the information that's required, having it at hand. Typically, we like to deal with the captain to make sure that we've got the proper report of that information. In the future, that may change, but certainly early planning, early notification where possible is always something that will lead to a better and more efficient border experience. We always like to hear from the community. Where is there an opportunity that we should see, something that's working well, something that someone has seen practice in a particular airport, another country, that we should be aware of and we should give thought to? The flip side to that is sometimes we have issues. Things don't work out quite as the way they should have been. It's an irritant. It's not well oiled. Well, we would like to hear from you all in terms of like, where can we get better? And you can do it directly with the CBSA, whether it's locally, whether it's through my office here in Ottawa, or through the association. Anthony and I stay in touch and happy to receive it in whatever venue or whatever approach that works well for you. But soliciting that feedback around both where can we seize an opportunity and where can we address perhaps something that might be lacking or a bit of an issue. In terms of our CAMPAS programs, we will be, as part of traveler modernization, looking at how can we replicate, if you will, trusted travelers, AKA in the style of Nexus, in the business aviation. So we've retained the CAMPAS corporate program when we shifted all others over into the Nexus space, but there will be an opportunity to rethink how we do that. And certainly the automation and the digital services will allow us to develop and contemplate a very different model, one that will allow digital submission of all travelers on a business or corporate aircraft, have the CBSA receive that information, ingest it to our system, do our magic around risking, and then determine that on arrival, those who need to speak with us can do so perhaps through a FaceTime, a Zoom, a Teams, some digital means without necessarily having to have an officer attend, whereas the balance of them may be actually cleared for entry into Canada. And so more to come in that space. Also want to bring the advanced declaration component into the general aviation, corporate business aviation, as well as other modes like waterborne pleasure crafts, so that you can have one application, you can have one profile, and you can use it across the various ways of entering Canada. Finally, just to mention that Transport Canada has introduced the Verified Traveler program available at CATSA for expedited clearances. There's a group of individuals who've been identified as automatic members, if you will. These are folks that already were seen to be verified, but we just didn't have a program around it. And being a Nexus member is one component that grants you access to the verified traveler benefits that have been announced. And so we've seen a bump in the Nexus applications. We continue to reduce the inventory. As I stated earlier, still lots of interview slots available at most airports and at our land border registration areas. But if that is something that is of interest to you, certainly Nexus is a pathway to becoming recognized as a verified traveler at CATSA under the Transport Canada announced program more recently. So wish we could have had a more interactive session, could have done some Q's and A's, but certainly hoping that I've left you with enough information in terms of where we are post-COVID, what we are focused on in the immediate, our future, modern transformation, digital, and anything we can do for your particular community. And that we'll generate some discussion at your event this week, and hoping that anything that comes from that, certainly I know that the associate Anthony will communicate those back to us. So again, thank you for the invitation. Wish I could be there. Have a good session, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.